Hello, this is Ms. Schrader. Today we are going to be talking about Akhenaten and Nefertiti. And I've gone to the trouble of going ahead and putting up a slide that shows how the words are written and how they sound, because they are a bit challenging. My students, you're going to need a piece of paper and something to write with. You're going to be taking notes, and when you're done, you're giving me 5 sentences on Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Now, I want to start by having you take a look at this very traditional piece of Egyptian sculpture. As you look at this, it looks to be carved from one solid block. It's very solid looking. You can't really see any space in between it. It's very generic, very block like. Um, and this was the way they did most of their sculpture, even with their pharaohs, their kings. They all kind of looked familiar. And then you come to Akhenaten. Okay, so here we have a sculpture of Akhenaten done during his lifetime. He was the pharaoh between 1353 and 1336 BCE. He is from the 18th dynasty, which I think is Middle Kingdom. And if you take a look at his picture here, you can see that he's got this long, narrow face. His cheeks are sunken. He does not look like a traditional pharaoh. Part of the reason for this is that he's going with the idea of showing himself as he actually looked. Akhenaten's original name was Amenhotep IV. Amenhotep means Amen, the main god of the Egyptians, is satisfied. He changed his name himself to Akhenaten, which means effective for the Aten. So he is going from a polytheistic religion with many gods in it to a monotheistic religion with one God. The only God that he's going to allow for the worship of is the Aten, the sun god. Now, one of the things that Akhenaten did was he moved the capital of Egypt south on the Nile River to the city of Amarna, which you can see shown here. Um, the original capital was much further north, near Cairo. And by moving it south, he moves it into the desert. And it would have been extremely hot and difficult to get enough water to supply your city, even though you're getting water from the Nile. The people were extremely uncomfortable there because it was so much hotter. And of course, when you think about it, he is worshiping his one god, the Aten, the sun. You can do that more easily in the desert. Okay, this is a picture of the Akhenaten stele. So this would be a pillar with pictures and information. This one was discovered at El Alamein in 1912, and it is showing Akhenaten on the left and his wife Nefertiti on the right, and their children around them. Now, there are a couple of things you need to notice here. The first one is that Akhenaten is shown as a very family oriented guy. He's got his wife who is shown the same size as him. And in ancient Egyptian art, the pharaoh would be shown much larger than everyone around him. And yet his wife is being shown at the same size. The next thing you'll notice, he's got this big protruding stomach. This is something that is shown in all of his artwork. And since he seems to have been someone who wanted his artwork to look realistic, we can assume he actually had this big protruding stomach. There have been scientists and historians who've been trying to figure out what the cause of that was. But the artwork is incredibly different. You'll also notice in the center at the top, they have his god, the Aten, shining down on them joyously. And the last thing I want to mention is, they do look like a very loving family, whereas traditionally sculptures or paintings of Egyptian families at that time would have been those stiff, solid pieces. Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti supposedly didn't have any sons, they only had daughters. And yet they seem to be very loving about their daughters here as well. Here we have another relief showing Akhenaten and his family. You notice his wife Nefertiti is shown a little bit smaller this time, but also you'll notice that his children are shown with him. They are all worshiping up towards the Aten. And of course, you can see, once again, that big protruding belly. He seems to have very white, almost ladylike hips, which is very, very strange. They really don't understand why he looks like that. Now, there are things about this particular sculpture of Akhenaten that are very traditional. He's got the fake beard, he's got the crown, he's got his arms crossed over his chest. On the other hand, you can see the long, angular face, very much his face. You can see the belly and the broad hips, once again, showing it very, very unique to him. Now, this is one of the most famous pieces of art in the world. It is a bust of Nefertiti. Remember, bust refers to the head and shoulders. Nefertiti is Akhenaten's principal wife. He had other wives, but she's the important one. And this was discovered at Amarna in 1912. And it is 19 inches in height, 44 inches or excuse me, 44 pounds in weight. It is limestone covered by painted stucco, and it is currently held in the Museum of Berlin. There are questions as to whether or not it is a fake, if it's not really as old as they imagine it to be. Um, and there's never been any actual result. But nowadays, if anybody does any work or drawing, have anybody play an actor playing Nefertiti, she always looks like this. And this is considered to be one of the great pieces of artwork. And it is assumed that this is what she actually looked like. And as I've mentioned, Nefertiti is Akhenaten's principal wife, and she's shown in those pictures that we showed earlier. They are shown as this loving husband and wife, taking care of their children and so on. One of the problems appears to have been that Akhenaten couldn't get a son with his wife. He had other sons, presumably, who could take care of that. Most stories suggest that Nefertiti died before her husband did. We really don't have any actual proof of that, but that's how the stories go. And the next thing you need to know, of course, is that Akhenaten deciding to move the capital south, change the way everything is done, have only one God, really messed things up for a lot of the religious leaders who were in charge of having worship for lots of gods. And so it reduced down their power, which made him exceedingly unpopular. When he died, they went to a great deal of trouble to get rid of his images, move everything back up to Giza, go back to the old way with many gods. When Akhenaten died, the throne went to his 9-year-old son, Tutankhaten. Remember, it's got that Aten at the end, something about honoring Aten. But of course, he was a child. He was only about 9 years old. And so the leaders who took over started off by changing his name to Tutankhamun, honoring Amun, their main god. They immediately move everybody back up to Giza, and they go back to the old religious ways. And this statue of, or this is the sarcophagus of Tutankhamun, who becomes famous later on, and I'll tell you why at another time, shows you once again the stiff formal concept on how things worked. And I want to remind you that he is not the son of Akhenaten's principal wife, Nefertiti. He is the son of a junior wife. They've actually found her mummy. She is identified as the younger lady. Okay, my students, we have been discussing Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti. I want you to give me 5 sentences about what you found interesting, educational, and important about them, and I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you.